beginning, it sure as hell didn't mean much to me. I was happy as a pig just test flying jets. As for rockets, they weren't for flying, they were for fireworks. But it all changed pretty damn quick. We got into a race. Putting a man on a rocket became the most important thing in the world. And I figured it ought to be me. That's a test pilot's nature. He wants to be first. The finish line. That's what the moon was. A brand new runway. Fate, luck, the Russians, whatever it was, it put us in the spotlight. And flying the thing was only half the job. The other half was making it look easy. And that's the part no one saw. It was never easy, never safe, never routine. I guarantee you never heard the real story. It was a hell of a ride.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
It was 8 years since Kennedy said we'd put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. With only 5 months to go, we were too busy getting ready for our first moonshot to worry much about the Russians. Then the CIA gave us a wake-up call we couldn't ignore. Satellite photos showed a monster rocket ready on the Soviet pad. It could only have one target, the moon. "24 hours later, the rocket was gone, blown up on the pad. Russians were out of the race, but their disaster, yet another reminder. This was the world's most dangerous business. Summer '69, but this isn't Woodstock. It's the moon launch at Cocoa Beach, and the world had come to watch. I was still grounded, running the astronaut office and doing everything but fly. Launch days were the worst. I felt like a damn babysitter. On July 16th, 1969, the routine was the same. Wake 'em up, feed 'em, stick 'em on the bus. Only this crew was going to the moon. It killed me. I could send anyone up there I wanted except for me and my buddy Al Shepard. The program had come a long way since Al became the first American in space, but he and I still had only 15 minutes of space time between us, and they were all his. Al's dizziness and my rough running heart meant we weren't going anywhere.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Good luck and Godspeed.
The liftoff went great, but we'd done those before. It was the landing we were worried about. That was no sure thing. But if 11 fails to land on the moon, 12 will do it, or 13. We were determined to get there before 1970.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. You are confirmed to go for orbit.
In mission control, I looked over at Al, and we both had the same thought. That should be me up there.
Obviously, I think every one of us wanted to land on the moon. That's what we were there for.
NASA could stop me from riding rockets, but they couldn't keep me from flying. Competition was always hot for space flights. But when I was selecting crews for the first moonshots, I had guys lining up to co-pilot my jet, impress me with their skills. But not that I'm suggesting for a minute they were kissing my ass.
Everybody knew who you had to impress, but it was hard to figure out how. It was dog eat dog.
There's no mystery about how I selected crews for the moon flights. I figured any one of these weenies would do a great job, so I put a list together of 18 and told them, one of you guys is going to be the first to walk on the moon. I don't know who, and I don't give a damn. You're all equally qualified. Of course, I knew one was better than the rest, but I couldn't go.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. You are go for TLI, over.
Roger. Ignition.
We confirm ignition, and the thrust is go.
Apollo 11, roger. Houston, Apollo 11 entered and gave us a magnificent ride.
Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins. 3 men headed for the history books. But they weren't picked for their personalities or because they were any better than the rest. They just happened to end up at the right slot on the flight rotation.
Apollo 11, this is Houston.
Looks like it's going to be impossible to get away from the fact that you guys are dominating all the news back here. Even Pravda in Russia is headlining the mission and calls Neil the czar of the ship.
Neil, czar of the ship. Buzz loved that. He didn't like playing second fiddle to anyone. Tension between Neil and Buzz came to a head when Buzz tried to grab the brass ring, the first step on the moon.
I'm sure you don't wait until you get on the surface of the moon before you decide who steps out first.
Being first on the moon obviously would be a landmark that everybody would remember because no one remembers the second guy. Do you remember the second guy to fly the Atlantic?
So I, at one time, made the observation to Neil that I felt we needed a decision on this, and that one way or the other, regardless of how I felt or he felt, we needed to have a decision made on this. And his observation was something to the effect that he realized the historical significance and that he was not going to make a decision that would rule him out of that opportunity.
Buzz Aldrin made no secret about who he thought should be the first one to take that step on the moon.
We had always assumed Neil Armstrong, who was the spacecraft commander, was going to be the first man on the moon. We always felt like it was an unnecessary conflict that was created by Buzz, and kind of it created kind of a bad taste in other people's mouth about Buzz making this fuss about it.
Within a week or two, there was a decision made that Neil would be the first one. And being a military man and understanding seniority, that was perfectly all right with me.
It came down to tradition, and tradition says the commander always goes first. Besides, Neil was closest to the door. But we had much bigger problems to worry about than the first step. Like, could we even get them on the moon?
There were a lot of times when I come home from work and think, we just aren't going to get to the moon. We cannot make the lunar module light enough.
The lunar module, or LEM, we'd designed for the landing could only operate in the moon's gravity. So we couldn't even test fly this baby. Neil had to make do with practicing the landing in a mock-up nicknamed the Flying Bedstead. Morale hit an all-time low when the bedstead went out of control and Armstrong ejected with only 1 second to spare.
11, this is Houston. You are go for LOI, over.
Roger. Go for LOI.
All your systems are looking good.
Everything looks okay up here.
Going around the corner, we'll see you on the other side, over.
Roger. Got them both? And go ahead.
Now, the actual descent, I called the team together and told them that, yeah, we had gone through a tough training period. We were really proud of these people here. We were about ready to sort of write into the history book that no matter what happened, good or bad, that day I was going to be with them. I was very proud of them, and let's go do it.
Okay, all flight controllers going around the horn, gonna go for undocking. Capcom, we're go for undocking.
Roger, Eagle, undock.
This was the first time we'd ever attempted a landing in the LEM. At least, when we were testing jets, we could eject. If this thing went down, Neil and Buzz were going down with it.
We'll monitor you, Delta 8.
Beautiful. You're a go to continue power descent.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for landing. Retro. Go. Fido. Go. Guidance. Go. Control. Go. Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Econ. Go. Surgeon.
Houston, you're go for landing, over.
Roger, understand. Go for landing. 1201. 1201.
Roger, 1201 alarm.
1201 alarm.
1201 alarm. The automatic pilot was dead. They were way off course, with a boulder field for a landing strip. Neil was winging it, hunting around for a place to touch down. And they were low on gas.
Okay, we're go.
We're go. Same height. We're go.
Into the ag, 47 degrees.
Roger.
Well, we get to 1 minute fuel remaining, and you'll hear on the voice uplink, you'll hear very trite 60 seconds.
60 seconds.
It was totally up to the crew from there on, and all you could do is Godspeed. You're sucking air, to put it bluntly.
Forward. 30 seconds. Forward.
By the time 30 seconds was called out, I knew that we were on the final descent. It just seemed like it was a long time. And without saying anything, I was just body English or whatever, trying to encourage Neil, bring it down, and let's get on the ground.
3.5 down, 9 forward. 5%. On any bite? 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust.
Come on, boys, put her down.
That's looking good, down 1/2. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. On back light. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
We copy you down, Eagle. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
That's the first time you had opportunity to really sit down and say, hey, Christ, we really did.
This is Apollo Control Houston at 105 hours. Now into the flight, Apollo 11.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming. I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar. Flag up now. Beautiful, just beautiful.
Probably the crucial decision was made in May of 1961 when President Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon in this decade. If he hadn't done that, we might still be horsing around trying to get to the moon.
I always thought I should have had something profound to say that night to the troops, but the truth is I walked out, looked up at the moon, and thought, those are two lucky sons of bitches up there. I'll never forget that picture. The guys in that little damn quarantine doghouse and Nixon looking through the window like he might catch moon germs. Well, we'd won the race to the moon, and Neil Armstrong was the most famous man on Earth. But we weren't going to stop there. We had all these great plans for space stations, big moon bases, even trips to Mars. The one thing we hadn't figured on was the public losing interest.
Well, it makes you wonder whether or not we get our priorities in order, actually.
It's not worth it. No way in the world.
Why should they go up there when they have so many ghettos that should be cured? People are going hungry all over the United States, and they need jobs and everything else.
Down to the pad. Man, that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me.
Apollo 12, the second landing. Already it was old hat, and the program was under question. That meant only one thing to astronauts. I might not get my ride. One guy was determined he would get his ride. Nothing was going to stop Al Shepard, not even the fact that he'd been grounded for 6 years.
I had tried everything that I knew of to figure out a way to cure the Meniere's syndrome. Just absolutely almost at my wit's end when one day Stafford came in and said, you know, Al, I've just been talking to a friend of mine who's involved in the ear business. He's with a clinic in Los Angeles. They've been experimenting with a surgical cure for many years. And I said, Tom, I am on my way.
Al didn't tell me he was having the operation. First I knew of it, he was knocking at my door saying he was good to go.
My first move, of course, was to head for a visit with my old friend Slayton. And obviously both of us knew that the next available mission, which had not been announced, was Apollo 13. So I said, Deke, that's the one I want. And Deke said, I think we can work it out. As I recall, the crew tentatively had been assigned for Apollo 13. I frankly don't remember who they were, but I'm sure they were qualified guys.
And disappointed.
And disappointed.
How in the hell did he pull that one off? But to get a flight like that, unreal. And here's Deke, who just had a minor fibrillation, no major problem, and here's Shepard on a command of a lunar mission. Well, he pulled it off.
He hadn't pulled it off quite yet. For the first time ever, the NASA brass rejected my crew selection.
Deke came to me and said, you know, Al's been grounded for some time, and we want to make sure that he gets plenty of training before he goes on this flight. And so why don't you take 13, and we'll give Al 14. And we were all happy until 2 days out.
We might give you a quick shot of our entertainment on board the spacecraft.
The whole world had watched the first lunar landing. Now we couldn't even get the networks to air this live TV show from Apollo 13. They ran soap operas instead.
Okay, Jim, it's been a real good TV show. We think we ought to conclude it from here now. What do you think?
Roger, sounds good, and this is the crew of Apollo 13. Wish everybody there a nice evening, and...
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem. Main B, bus undervolt.
Roger, main B undervolt.
Stand by.
First an explosion, now they're losing all their power.
Flight, I've got a feeling we've lost 2 fuel cells. I hate to put it that way, but I don't know why we've lost them, and it's not an instrumentation problem.
O2 tank 1 is steadily decreasing.
We had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there.
It doesn't look good.
Of course, we didn't know what caused it. Didn't know whether it was a meteorite that hit someplace. And I looked up at Fred Haise, who was in the lunar module at the time. I could tell from his expression he didn't know what caused it.
And it looks to me, looking out the hatch, that we are venting something. We are venting something out into space.
I looked out the left-hand window, and it dawned on me that this was oxygen. Didn't take much intelligence on my part to realize that. And that's when the old lead weight went down to the bottom of my stomach. It couldn't have happened at the worst time. 200,000 miles from Earth, and now we have an explosion and we're losing all of our oxygen.
We couldn't figure out what the hell had happened. We'd already proven we could handle emergencies. A failure here, a breakdown there, but this was different. Everything was failing at once. We called in every man we had.
When Kraft came in, I said, Chris, I think we're in a bunch of shit.
Here is a bulletin from ABC News. The Apollo 13 spacecraft has had a serious power supply malfunction.
At the moment, the astronauts are continuing to try to isolate their trouble. A late report says the spacecraft now is operating on battery power alone. All unnecessary equipment is being turned off.
I want you to get some guys figuring out minimum power in the LEM to sustain life.
We figure we've got about 15 minutes worth of power left in the command module, so we want you to start getting over in the LEM and getting some power on that.
The spacecraft would be dead in 15 minutes. The crew needed a lifeboat, and the only thing that came close was the lunar module.
And about the time they finally called up and said, we think you got a real problem, that you might have to use the lunar module as a lifeboat. Well, Fred and I were already climbing through the tunnel going back into the lunar module.
I'd say this is as serious a situation as we have ever had in manned spaceflight. If at any time in the mission, however, the LEM had separated and we had gotten ourselves into a rendezvous situation or the command module being around the moon, then what you state is absolutely true. It would be a fatal situation.
And that was probably the toughest, undoubtedly the toughest press conference I've ever been to, where I knew the wives and the kids of the guys who were up there and who were close friends of mine, and I wasn't really convinced we were going to get them back. It really didn't look very good at the moment.
Now the media was covering the story. The third moon mission might not preempt regular TV, but a disaster in space would. the spacecraft didn't have the power to turn around. We'd have to use lunar gravity to whip them back to Earth.
They might have had in the back of their mind, it'd be much better for that crew to come back and hit the Earth in some manner. Not so much that it was survivable, but rather than have us as a monument to the space program that would whip around the Earth for infinity.
We were racing against time. The lunar module was keeping the guys alive, but it was never designed for a long trip.
Fred Haise determined how much oxygen we had in the lunar module, how long the batteries would last, how much water we had on the lunar module, not just to drink, but also we had to use it to cool all of our electronic systems, otherwise they would fail.
When Deke asked me first, will we have enough power? And I told him very honestly, Deke, I don't think so.
And it turned out that we would run out of electrical power and water long before we could get home.
We had to get them home sooner. That meant speeding up the spacecraft. But they only had enough power for one attempt at this critical burn.
And just as we were approaching the moon, the ground had called up and said, yeah, we think these procedures will work. Are you ready to copy? And I said, yes. And I looked over at my companions. And I said, gentlemen, what are your plans here? And they said, Jim, if we go around the far side of the moon, we're going to take some pictures. And I said, if we don't get home, you won't get them developed.
Okay, look, let's get the camera squared away and get all set for the burn. We got one chance, pals.
Jim, you go for the burn. Go for the burn. Roger, understand. Go for the burn.
Guide, first line. Control, okay?
We're go.
Go, Capcom. Pinko, do you have the Omni for the burn attitude?
We're burning 40%. West Houston, you're looking good. Shut down. Roger, shut down. I say that was a good burn.
At this point, I wanted to get the crew some rest. They'd been awake for days.
I feel you've gone a hell of a long time without any sleep. We're going to have to start thinking about getting people back to sleep again because I didn't have any sleep last night at all.
You couldn't sleep. I mean, it was just a cold, clammy. Everything was getting wet. All the windows were perspiring. The metal was very cold to the touch. It seemed to sap out any heat out of your body when you touched it.
I developed a prostate urinary infection and had the most severe chills and fever that I'd ever had, and at times couldn't stop shaking. And we were trapped in this vehicle.
It was amazing the amount of isolation we had in the spacecraft and not realizing the impact of our crises had back on Earth. You know, we knew we were in trouble. We talked to Houston, but they never relayed back, you know, that the whole world was glued to their TV sets.
We'd overcome obstacle after obstacle, but it wasn't over yet. We jettisoned the service module, and then we saw it. The huge hole left by the explosion.
And there's one whole side of that spacecraft missing. The whole panel is blown out. A lot of debris is just hanging out to the side.
An explosion that could tear a hole that big could have damaged the heat shield. Without that shield, they'd burn alive. No one said anything to the crew. Nobody had to.
Let's get it. Okay, copy that. Farewell, Aquarius, and we thank you.
The lifeboat was gone. The crew was back in the crippled command module with a dicey heat shield and only enough battery power for re-entry. All we could do was cross our fingers.
Hang in there, it won't be long.
Okay, LOS in a minute or a minute and a half. An entry attitude, we'd like Omni Charlie.
And if there's a time when you died 1,000 deaths, it was wading through that period of time when it was just up to the crew and the good work that you'd done before. And there was no more help you could, nothing you could do. I mean, you were helpless.
Odyssey Houston, standing by, over.
And then finally there's that vast relief where you just finally see the spacecraft on TV, you see the chutes blossom out.
Oh, and your chutes look good.
Odyssey Houston, we show you on the mains. It really looks great.
control room as we head splashdown.
This one here, it was really a combination of absolute exhilaration and total exhaustion. But it was just a point, and then I just cried when it was all over.
My interest in aviation goes all the way back to Lindbergh. I was a young boy when he flew. Of course, he immediately became a national hero. He became certainly a hero of mine.
Al Shepard was selected to carry the national image on our first flight in space after we had been shot down by Gagarin. Then it was fitting that after Apollo 13, Al Shepard is the commander of the mission that is going to restore the confidence in the space program.
The retread and the two rookies. That's what Al, Stu Rusa, and Ed Mitchell were known as. There was a whole lot of bitching in the ranks that Al picked two guys with no flight experience to go to the moon.
Everybody thought we were the three rookies. And in all of my private conversations with Stu and Ed, it was, fellas, we're going to land closer, we're going to bring back the best rocks, we're going to fly the best goddamn lunar mission that's ever been flown.
No one ever fought harder to get a flight assignment than Al Shepard. And no one ever worked harder to get ready than this old Project Mercury veteran and his two rookies.
He and I walked out and looked at his Saturn V, 38 stories high, all lit by spotlights. And I've often related that moment to a time 10 years previous when I was a young lieutenant getting up at 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning to watch this guy named Alan Shepard jump on top of a rocket and blast off into space. And here I was 10 years later standing next to that same man. He was going to go to the moon the next morning. You know, how many people can say that?
After years of frustration from watching others take their trip into space, Shepard was finally getting his chance. America's first man in space was going to the moon.
20 seconds, the guidance system now going internal. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence start. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff from Apollo 14. The tower is clear. 3 minutes past the hour.
Shepard reports roll program completed. Pitch profile still in progress.
Okay, we're 1 Bravo.
Status check in mission control. Coming up all greens on the flight director's console.
In Houston, everything looks good here on the ground. Apollo 14, Houston. Here, go for the moon, go for TLI.
Right here, go for TLI.
Al had his ride, but after Apollo 13, we weren't taking anything for granted. And sure enough, we had problems from the get-go.
The first major function on the flight, of course, was to dock with the lunar module and be on our way.
Houston, we're about to dock.
You get that thing dead center, bounced right back out with no capture.
Okay, Houston, we've hit it twice.
If they couldn't dock, they'd be coming right back home. The space program didn't need another failure.
I thought that maybe I didn't hit it hard enough.
Sure looks like we're closing fast enough. I'm going to back out here and try it again.
You do have a go for another try.
Tried it again.
I hit it fairly hard on that next try. Ed made the comment, said, hey, let's don't run through it.
Well, we better back off here and think about this one, Houston.
That, of course, initially says, hey, you can't go to the moon.
Al had waited too long to let a broken latch stand in his way.
We were so target-oriented that we began thinking about all possible ways to correct the docking problem. And one obvious way which occurred to me immediately was the fact that we could do it manually.
Al proposed to Houston that we put on our suits and depressurize the command module, and he would go outside and pull the two together. This would have been something totally unpracticed, pretty much on the on the cutting edge of a risky operation, to say the least.
Of course, the immediate reaction on the ground was, well, that guy Shepard really wants to get there, doesn't he?
We suggest you come in hard and fast and retract the arrow immediately.
Roger, Ed. We got a very good picture.
We got some, Houston.
I believe I got a hard dock, Houston. That's a hard dock. Roger, Al. That's great. Super job.
Okay, Al, everything looks good down here, and you have a go for LOI.
Hey, Fredo, we sure picked a clear day to arrive. There's not much haze in the air at all.
Incredible.
This is really a wild place up here.
Wheels down and Al would be there. All he had to do was land. But this would be the toughest landing yet, even for a carrier pilot. The site was a mountainous region with peaks 10,000 feet high. Just as Al started down, he lost the thing he needed most. The landing radar was dead.
And we kept getting lower and lower and closer to 13,000 feet, and still no landing radar.
There was no way we were going to let Al go down without radar. And if he didn't get it working by 13,000 feet, mission rules said he had to abort.
After all this effort, all this time, we're almost there, and we've got a serious problem here.
As Al got closer to 13,000 feet, I started getting nervous. My old buddy just might disobey that order.
Apollo 14, this is Houston.
The ground rules are sometimes made upon arbitrary decisions. Maybe one could have gone to a lower altitude before deciding to abort. Maybe one could have gone down to the point actually where one could pitch over and actually view the lunar surface. And of course, if one does that, then hypothetically one is able to make a safe landing.
He was not going to abort. He's going to land.
Finally, some bright young man in the control center realized, from looking at his indications, that the radar was in fact on, but it was locked up on infinity. So he said, well, let's turn it off and let it recycle, and I think it might work.
And Terry's Houston would like you to cycle the landing radar breaker.
Cycle.
Okay, we'd like to accept the radar.
Board radar. Oh, great.
And then Terry's Houston, your go for tomorrow.
90 feet. 4 feet per second, 5 feet per second now. Okay, down, looking great.
50 seconds.
Okay, 50 feet down. 50 feet.
In good shape, too.
50 feet per second. 40 feet. 3 feet per second. 30. 3 feet per second. Looking great. 20 feet. 10. 3 feet per second. Contact now. That was a beautiful one.
And close, but other than that, we're in great shape. Yeah. Right on the landing site.
And Mitchell turned to me and said, Al, what were you going to do if the landing radar wasn't working by 13,000 feet? I looked at him and I said, Ed, you'll never know.
Okay, Al, beautiful. We can see you coming down the ladder right now. It looks like you're about on the bottom step and on the surface. Bedford, old man.
Okay, you're right. And it's been a long way, but we're here.
So one of us had made it at least. And while I couldn't be in Al's shoes as he stood there on the moon, I understood better than anyone what it meant for him to be there.
It had been a long build-up to finally reach the point where I was able to stand on the surface of the moon. It was an emotional moment for me. It was a sense of personal triumph, personal satisfaction. In a few moments of maybe patting myself on the back before it became obvious that we had to get back on schedule and get on with the job.
Take a look at Palmaro. Take a look at Cone Crater, I should say. And it's a very impressive sight. Okay, what do you think's a good spot for the LSEP?
Soil here is a bit firmer, I think. Almost 2 hours now, is that right, Fred?
I don't know if Al came back with the best rocks, but he certainly came back with plenty of them. The mission had been a success, but Al wasn't quite done. There was one parting moonshot he wanted to make.
Okay, Houston. In my left hand, I have a little white pellet that's familiar to millions of Americans. Drop it down. We're going to try a little sand trap shot here.
That looked like a slice to me, Al.
Miles and miles and miles.
Maybe Al Shepard will tell us for the first time what the brand of that golf ball was he hit on the moon.
Nice try, John.
But I think the real thing is the truth of how far it went. We get all different stories on that.
Crew of injuries is leaving Farmar Base.
Roger, Al. Yeah. You and Ed did a great job.
And with this closeout, Al Shepard, now at age 27 years, becomes the undisputed leader in time spent working on the moon.
3, 2, 1, 0. We have ignition.
What a liftoff.
And liftoff.
Roger, ignition.
When we left the moon, and that's such a beautiful sight where you're coming up off the moon and you're going so fast. I mean, it is so beautiful. And I said, Al, have you got something prophetic to say? And he looked over at me and he said, Stu, you know me better than that. And that's typical Al.
One of the moments which I shall never forget occurred 3 weeks after the return from the moon. My father and I were just having a little brandy in the living room. And out of the blue, he said, do you remember when you first called us back in 1959 and said you were going to become an astronaut? I said, yes, sir. And he said, do you remember what I said? I said, yes, sir, I certainly do. You were not in favor of it. And he raised his glass and said, I was wrong. That's all he had to say.
Apollo 17, the final moonshot. Not even Al Shepard could turn the tide of public opinion. His mission had been a success, but America had turned its back on the moon. Apollo missions 18, 19, and 20 were canceled.
17, Houston, you are go for orbit, go for orbit.
We knew that Apollo 17 was the end of Apollo. The press would never forget it. They kept saying, how does it feel to be the tail of the dog, or how does it feel to be part of the end? And, you know, guys were losing their jobs as a result of Apollo. As soon as we lifted off, all the Grumman crew got their pink slips.
There was a feeling of profound disappointment that the program was ending. Of course, I was disappointed that I didn't get the chance to go to the moon, but more than that, we'd put together this tremendous team and technology. To stop it now just didn't make any sense.
Historians will look back on this program and wonder why the United States, at the height of its technological achievement, just quit.
Sure, I knew that I would be the last man of Apollo to walk on the moon, and it might be as long as 10 or 15 or 20 years. But truly, when I left the surface, I believed then, and I believe now, someone will be back someday.
May the spirit of peace in which we came be reflected in the lives of all mankind.
Those were the last official words spoken on the moon.
Now, the unofficial words are about 10 seconds before Jack Schmidt and I lifted off, and I just looked over at Jack and I said, Jack, let's get this mother out of here.
Proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good.
I remember when I called George Lowe and told him I was leaving the program, he wrote me a very nice letter, and in that letter he said, there'll never be another Apollo in anybody's life. And I thought maybe that says it all.
But the story's not over yet. There's one chapter left to be told, and it's mine. I always knew they were wrong about my heart, that one day I'd be able to say, Deke Slayton, astronaut. I knew I could have flown any one of those missions, but the docs got fixated on the fact that once in a while my heart skipped a beat. Then as suddenly as it started, the problem stopped. I had a bad cold and started taking vitamins by the handful. Then it hit me. My heart hadn't missed a beat in months. Of course, it wasn't easy convincing the NASA docs that vitamins could cure a heart fibrillation.
We knew more about Deke Slayton's heart than any person we ever flew. And that goddamn doctor stood up in the meeting and said, well, we know we've said that before, but if he fibrillates on the pad, we want to stop the count. And I fired that son of a bitch.
When Deke was able to finally get approval to fly again, I was just so delighted for him, so happy. And I thought, well, this guy really wants to fly. He's even going to learn how to speak Russian so he can fly in space.
Boris,
All of us wanted to be first at something. Maybe there was some poetic justice there in Deke's case, that he got to make the first joint mission with the Soviets.
Talk about a Hollywood ending. My ride came right out of a movie, Marooned. It portrayed the Russians as the good guys, saving 2 American astronauts stranded in space. This movie helped convince both countries that a joint mission was possible, even during the Cold War.
I want to be a movie star.
Alexei Leonov, cosmonaut, and my buddy. He was one of the guys we'd been competing against in the race to the moon. Now we were on the same team, training together, doing our bit to thaw out the Cold War. Here I am at another pre-launch breakfast. Only this time, I'm not sitting on the sidelines. Finally, it's my turn.
Good morning again. Jim Hartz and Alan Shepard from the Mission Control Center in Houston, Texas.
At that time, we were very close, having worked together in an administrative capacity over the years when neither one of us could fly. And to finally see my buddy get a chance to give it a go really meant a great deal to me.
5, 4, 3, 2, engine sequence start. 1, 0, launch commit. We have a liftoff. All engines building up thrust. Moving out. Clear the tower.
Roger, tower clear. Roger, Tom, you got good thrust on all engines. You're right on the money. Roger.
Santa, this is worth waiting 16 years for.
Hello, Houston, you're go for station. Roger, go for station.
The launch. I loved it. Damn, I'd like to do one of those every day. Didn't get a whole lot of time to cogitate, but I couldn't help feeling a little sad that this was the last time an Apollo spacecraft would soar into space. And of course, I thought about Gus.
Apollo, Houston, I got 2 messages for you. Moscow is go for docking. Houston is go for docking. It's up to you guys. Have fun.
All righty, sounds good. Apollo, Mila, Alexei. 3 meters. 1 meter. Contact. Capture. Got it? Here.
If you'd have told me way back when that one day we'd be shaking hands with the Russians in space, I think I'd have told you to go see one of my doctor friends at NASA. The irony is, we needed the Russians all along. If we hadn't had them sitting out there, we might never have even tried to shoot the moon. It's like all American endeavors. We've got to have a competitor.
All philosophers say the best part of a good dinner is not what you eat, but with whom you eat.
Let me call to express my very great admiration for your hard work, your total dedication in preparing for this first joint flight.
Deke, you've had a very, very long record of distinguished service preparing other astronaut crews for various space missions. And we're extremely pleased to see you on the crew of the first
international manned space flight. As the world's oldest space rookie, do you have any advice for young people who hope to fly on future space missions?
Well, yes, I have a lot of advice for young people, but I guess probably one of the most important bits is to, number one, decide what you really want to do, and then secondly, never give up until you've done it.
In the beginning, we didn't share a dream. We shared a drive to be the best. Farther, faster, higher. The creed we lived and died by. But who could have known it would take us so far?
I feel so fortunate that I happened to be around at a time after hundreds of thousands of years when people, whether they moved out of a cave or not, looked up and looked at the stars and things and wondered, what's up there? And we haven't gone very far yet. We're a tiny little distance off the Earth. But how lucky we are to have been around and to have been able to take part in some of those first little steps.
We were test pilots at the right time, right place. We were rivals, friends, fellow travelers, some of the luckiest men who ever lived.
Deke Slayton, astronaut, died of cancer in 1993 during the making of this series. His heart was strong until the end. Six hours after his death, Deke's racing plane was spotted taking off from a California airport. Not only had Deke died hours before, but that same plane, that same time, was in a Nevada museum. As Deke always said, no matter what happens, keep the dream alive.
Godspeed and good tailwinds, buddy.